This city should not have worked. No engines, no pumps. No single mind watching grain, water, roads, coin and law. Yet every piece was required, every single day. 1 weak link and the daily routine becomes a breaking point. Hunger doesn't wait. And the whole machine held on something as small as 1 man and 1 token. Somewhere in the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era, a man walked to a distribution portico in the Campus Martius, presented a small token, and collected his monthly grain. The grain had begun as silt on the floor of the Nile Delta. It had been harvested, loaded onto ships, carried across the Mediterranean, unloaded at Ostia, moved upriver, warehoused, weighed, and administered through a bureaucracy that stretched across 1,000 miles of sea and province. And it arrived, measured, at his hands. He had never seen the river that made it possible. He would never meet a single person in the chain that delivered it. The token worked. That is the fact that demands explanation. How did a single ancient city coordinate the daily survival of somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people? Without modern logistics, without a central planning ministry, and without any single actor who could see the whole machine? The city is Rome, in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, at imperial peak. Not the empire as a whole, not the republic, this city, on these hills, in this century. Grain arrived from Egypt and North Africa. Freshwater came through gravity-fed aqueducts, drawing from springs in the Apennine foothills. Roads and sea lanes carried tax, troops and goods across roughly 40 provinces. Law and coinage made transactions portable across dozens of languages. And public spectacle managed the crowd. Those other systems had concentrated in one place. Several distinct, separately administered systems fed, watered, connected, governed, and managed this city. This episode names them. The series proves them one by one. Return to the man on the Aventine. He is not a name in the record. He is a role, a freeborn citizen holding a Tessera, a token entitling him to a monthly grain ration under the system the Romans called the Annona. Whether the state provided it out of genuine social obligation or out of fear of what a hungry crowd might do is a question historians still argue. For him, the distinction was probably irrelevant. The machine delivered. What he could not see was how many things had to go right simultaneously across an entire sea for that to remain true. The machine that kept him alive was the same machine that made him utterly dependent on systems he could neither see nor touch. Rome's coordination was not a triumph over fragility. It was fragility organized at scale. Whether Rome ran on a deliberate master plan or on separate apparatuses that came to reinforce one another is genuinely debated. Either way, it ran on several at once, each with its own staff, its own costs, its own failure points. What is not debated is that by the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, they were all running at once, and the city depended on all of them. Consider the weight of that dependency in one dimension. At roughly 200 kilograms of grain per person per year, a standard ancient subsistence estimate, a city of 500,000 to 1 million people required somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 tons of grain annually, possibly more. No other city in the Mediterranean world drew on supply at this scale. Provincial cities of tens of thousands fed largely from their own hinterlands, while Rome had long since outgrown any hinterland that could carry it. A poor harvest or a shipping failure, 1,500 kilometers away, registered as hunger on the Aventine. The city's population is worked backwards from consumption estimates and the area the city covered, not counted directly, and the annual grain tonnage follows from the same assumptions. The grain dole itself is documented in inscriptions and legal texts. The aqueducts ran by measurable gravity gradient. What remains contested is how far Rome's interlocking systems reflect deliberate planning, and how far they accumulated from separate responses to separate crises. what the record contains no trace of at all. The mortality rate of the city's poor when the system strained, and the names of the enslaved and coerced workers whose labor built and maintained the infrastructure. Rome's survival at this scale was a consequence of coordination. Several administered systems leaning on one another, together keeping somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people alive in one city. That interdependence was Rome's achievement, and, in the same breath, its risk. The first machine was the simplest and the most existential. How do you feed a city of that size? Perhaps 1 million people. Every day?